You ever notice that people have a very weird time with arrogant women in films and TV? Yeah? Oh, okay, you've been online then for a few days. Congratulations. The stereotype of the girl boss has become a common talking point among online culture critics. But I think it reached exhausting degrees when watching the recent response to Marvel's Ironheart. The biggest sticking point appeared to be the ethics of the central character, Riri Williams, and how arrogant and cocky she came across, that her pride and confidence is undue, that nothing she does is justified. Or rather, nothing that she does justifies her being so full of herself. That's the common rhetoric online following the show's release. Which, one, I don't really agree with. The Ironheart show presents an incredibly gifted girl who insists on using her gifts to create something
iconic,
which in the process causes those around her and herself pain and suffering as she passes up reasonable opportunities for success and toys with forces she cannot comprehend and chooses not to fully understand. In a rush to succeed, looking for the billion-dollar resource Tony Stark used to succeed, she ends up making a deal with things that are outside her control.
You can call me Mephisto.
Her drive to succeed pushes her, but it also drives her into work, and in order to process the pain of losing both her stepdad and best friend Natalie to a drive-by shooter, she builds suits, because her stepdad loved Iron Man, but also because that protective suit of armor can prevent other people from dying, like those she loved. A very honest motivation. To this end, Riri Williams joins a gang, exploits the son of the MCU's first villain for tech.
Cool.
Do you have a choice?
And spoilers for the end of Ironheart from this point onward. You had a month to watch it, get over it. She makes a deal with Mephisto, Marvel's devil, in order to bring Natalie, her dead best friend, who also became an AI that was then deleted by the magic suit getting magic powers, back to life. This, of course, is after watching what happened to the Hood, someone who had previously made a deal with Mephisto, and being told by every single person who knows how magic works in this universe that she knows, to avoid dealings with dark magic you don't understand. She then proceeds to have dealings with dark magic she really does not understand. Riri's arrogance leads her into bigger trouble, and the entire show calls her out on this. It's due to her arrogance that she is nearly killed, and only when she reaches out for others for help is she able to succeed with their assistance. The show frames Riri's arrogance as a flaw, yet a number of critics just cite Riri's arrogance as a reason not to enjoy the show, which, you know what? If that's off-putting to you, that's fine. You are allowed your personal tastes, and nothing I say in this video should change your mind in that sense. But I personally don't get this complaint, mainly because one of my favorite fictional characters of all time is an arrogant character whose arrogance is a crutch that she uses to avoid addressing deep-seated trauma involving the death of a parent, who throws herself into work and prides herself on success as a means to validate her very existence. Like Riri, this character also goes into college at an absurdly young age. This character masks her own insecurities by projecting them onto others. And bizarrely, though this character is far more arrogant than Riri, and does far more harsh things than Riri ever does, the internet not only loves this character, but has loved this character for over 30 years now. I'm of course talking about Asuka Langley Soryu from Neon Genesis Evangelion.
If you don't open your mind to her, your Ava will not move.
Fuck you! Asuka is an ace pilot for an Evangelion, a bioengineered titanic creature that can be piloted to combat those colossal kaiju known only as the Angels, and they're controlled by the organization NERV, which is run by Gendo Ikari and the secret council Sele. I'm calling it Sele because the ADV dub. Asuka is one of only 3 people who can pilot the Avas, the other 2 being Rei Ayanami and Shinji Ikari. And Asuka, at the start of her series, is the best sync rates, most advanced model of Evangelion, and she makes sure you know it. She makes sure you know how great she is.
There! Get ready for an amazing display of piloting, third child.
But something happens here. Shinji, the newest pilot and son of Gendo, the head of NERV, ends up getting better than Asuka. Add to that, it becomes clear in Evangelion that Rei and Shinji are both more relevant to the core conflict of the series, and thus more important to Gendo Ikari and NERV as a whole. And Asuka can't help but notice, as the series goes on, how she's less and less useful to resolving all the problems of the story. And that reveals very rapidly that all of her cockiness is just a facade, hiding a lot of insecurity. But what I think makes a lot of people go soft on Asuka as opposed to Riri is that the circumstances leading to Asuka being the way she is are far, far, far more fucked up than anything Riri goes through. And Riri made a deal with the devil, keep that in mind. This, she does have the same general arc. She fails due to her own actions, but unlike Riri, everyone in the cast is either too caught up in their own messes to offer meaningful help, or don't know how to help, or, in some cases, just don't care. A few characters like Ritsuko just find Asuka annoying and see her emotional breakdown as a hindrance, while Asuka does rise back in the end of Evangelion and has one of the most badass scenes where she almost saves the day, single-handedly. It's due to Shinji's inaction that Asuka is essentially overwhelmed and brutally torn to ribbons by the mass-produced Evas. Don't worry, she gets better. And Shinji, well, let's just say there's that hospital scene, and that's infamous for a reason, and just makes you feel worse for this poor girl. Asuka is punished for her arrogance in a disproportionately cruel way. Like Riri, it isn't clear if Asuka learned anything from her experiences. Hell, even the moments that snap both of them out of their collective depressive funks, it's remembering the dead parent figure really loved them the whole time. Now, while Riri has her friends around her, her family, Natalie's AI, to kind of give her some sense of context and help lead her to this conclusion, Asuka, not so much. She's all alone. Though, interesting enough, Asuka and Riri both have one other thing in common. They're both minorities. Riri is black in America, and Asuka is biracial, coming from both German and Japanese descent. But she's barely literate in Japanese. She makes no attempt to acclimate to Japanese life, and constantly mocks how Japanese people live while living in Japan. Yet the fandom loves Asuka, while the Marvel fandom hates Riri. And look, we will get to the particularly obvious differences between these two very soon, but let's address the more nuanced arguments first, because I think there's more complexity here than just simply marking it down to racism by default. One big issue is the power and skill of an arrogant character being unearned, which, considering that we see Riri train, rebuild her suits, lift from Wakandan tech, and base her models off of already existing technology that have existed in her world for decades, there's some idea that maybe she has earned her marks, that she's worked with what was made before and built upon that in her own way. And the suit that she constructs ultimately is far less powerful than just about every single Iron Man suit since maybe the first Mark I. It falls apart after its first flight from MIT to Chicago, after all, until she enhances her suit with magic. Meanwhile, Asuka is the best pilot because she's just the best, and she's one of the first ones to pilot in Eva alongside Rei. And when someone who is just as good as her comes into play, she can't handle that. She realizes she's a big fish in a small pond, whereas Riri is part of a continuum, building upon what came before, and even then still falling short of the high levels that preceded her. In both cases, Riri and Asuka are not particularly unique. They are remarkable, but not unique, unlike Avatar Korra.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
Korra is the Avatar from the last Airbender continuity, and she is the only person who can bend all four elements in the world of the last Airbender. She is told from a young age that she is going to be destined for greatness, but when she ends up arriving in a public city later on to learn airbending, she's extremely overconfident and cocky, but her haste and arrogance is what leads her to struggling to learn airbending, a practice that requires meditation, calmness, and careful contemplation of emotions, things that she's bad at.
Get the fuck out of my sight before I demolish you.
Her arc throughout the 4 seasons of Legend of Korra are defined by her balancing her rashness and her need to learn and develop her skills, while also causing a lot of harm in the process. Many fans criticize how Legend of Korra has Korra learn airbending too fast in the first season, and her kaiju powers in the second season are just They're sudden, they don't make sense, really. It's like all of a sudden out of the blue, just to have her have a cool fight scene at the end. She becomes powerful as the plot demands, not because she necessarily learned something, but because we're running out of episodes per season. She is born knowing 3 of the 4 elements without any training, something that Aang could not do. Yet despite her later connections to the spirit world, she is completely disengaged with spiritualism when Tenzin starts training her.
Is something funny?
Yeah, you're telling me to embrace freedom, but you won't even let me listen to the radio?
I swear to fucking God!
But then comes season 3 and 4, which I think is the point where a lot of people started to get on Korra's side ultimately. Korra is pushed to the humiliation conga line, where, like with Riri and Asuka, she grows as a character and is able to rise to a new status after facing extreme adversity. But unlike Riri and Asuka, this comes after 2 seasons where her overconfidence and skills are reflective of her true power, and the show rewards her for being the way she is. She's not only cocky, but she can back it up. And Korra doesn't have any traumatic backstory either, like Asuka or Riri. She's just born better.
Woohoo!
But, due to her own arrogant actions, she causes her own immediate downfall and reshapes the world around her. Also, similarly to Asuka, part of her psychological breaking at the end of season 3 is due to an intrusive, hallucinogenic force that rips apart her insecurities and makes her relive her worst fears about herself. Though, for Korra, it's because of mercury poisoning. And with Asuka, it's because an angel forces its way into her brain in a sequence compared explicitly in the show to a very different kind of assault, I'll put it that way. Both Korra and Asuka entered the final arc of their stories broken, with Korra wheelchair-bound and Asuka comatose and starved, unable to lift her hand off of the bed. In all 3 cases so far, the arrogance is a flaw that needs to be overcome, yet audiences focus on the confidence being unearned. In many ways, they're not what people call the perfect victim. The idea of the ideal victim was codified in 1986 with the publication of criminologist Niles Christie's work. The idea that circumstances in which a person becomes a victim need to be taken into account by the court of public opinion before anyone regards what they're saying as legitimate. If 2 people are injured in assault, for example, but one person was assaulted walking their dog and the other was assaulted after yelling at someone, people are going to be more sympathetic towards the person just walking their dog, because they were just walking their dog. They weren't doing anything at all to justify being attacked. Whereas the other person, they can make the argument, maybe they did justify, maybe they brought it upon themselves. But this is an example of a bigger factor. The type of person who is considered a victim by the public inherently needs to be someone who the public sees as more sympathetic. In effect, in most cases, the ideal victim is someone with status in society, and someone that society does not already marginalize or spread bigoted beliefs about already. After all, they need the power in society to be visible, and visibility is important to be recognized as a victim at all. If society needs an ideal victim, then bigotries and biases need to be factored in when considering if a victim is quote-unquote perfect. If you already think a certain marginalized person is malignant, then everything that they do will be framed through that lens. According to Gloria J. Brown Marshall, an associate professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, some people are just inherently going to be seen as imperfect victims by the nature of the situation or who they are.
When we get to the word victim, you talk about who the victim is and to what degree they have been victimized. We've been wrestling with this issue in college. Examples of assault cases. What was she wearing? Why was she at the party? How much did she have to drink? When you start talking about this ideal victim, too often you have a gender bias, you have a culture bias, and you have all of these other biases.
The point is, our biases reframe how we see a character's actions. There are a ton of male characters who are extremely arrogant.
Wait a second, there's no way a bunch of girls took us down.
A bunch of girls, huh? The Unagi's gonna eat well tonight.
A great example of this is Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z.
I find it hard to believe that my cells are in your body. How could you have turned out so ugly? What a waste.
Or Tony Stark from Marvel, especially the MCU.
I am, man.
Both are extremely overconfident characters who encounter obstacles that stagger their pride to varying degrees. In the case of Vegeta, it's his fight with Goku at the very beginning of DBZ, and learning that despite his elite status as an elite Saiyan, there were Saiyans who transcended his strength purely through hard work. Now for Tony, it's learning that his weapons that he built for the US government were being used as weapons against his nation. And in fact, not only against his nation, but against the innocent and vulnerable. He thought he was building weapons for war. What he was building were tools for massacres. Now, in both cases, the character remains cocky afterwards, and they're still full of themselves. Vegeta is still a proud Saiyan. Tony Stark is still making jokes and snarking all the way around.
It means get lost, Squidward.
But they often reach greater heights of power after their pride is wounded, and they build from that wounded pride to build something greater of themselves. Yet for female heroes, while they're forced to justify their pride, male heroes just sort of are accepted with their pride. A ton of people get really angry with Ironheart when Riri indicated that Tony Stark accomplished everything thanks to him being a billionaire. And every critic of the show would cite the same scene as evidence as to why this wasn't true. Tony Stark
was able to build this in a cave with a bunch of scraps.
I think you all forgot the movie with this line in it. No, Tony Stark did not make his arc reactor with a bunch of scraps from a bin. The Ten Rings supplied him with all the tools to construct Jericho missiles, and then some. He had billions of dollars of materials around him, and he had help with Jensen. And he was basing the design of the arc reactor off a larger one he had done at home. Presumably, he already had an idea how to make it miniature before starting. And the Iron Man suit he built collapsed after one use. So yeah, when Riri says Tony couldn't have become Iron Man without all that money, she's right. Everyone forgets Jensen's there.
Why do you think he's still alive, huh?
Riri's doing it on her own because she's pushed herself to be on her own. She doesn't even have the help Tony had to become a better man. Now both Korra and Vegeta, they're both born inherently with incredible power. And while both do train and grow more powerful, they're starting from peak, above everyone else basically. But why is it that Korra's pride is seen as something that prevents people from liking her, but Vegeta's pride is one of the reasons why people love him so much?
You won't be winning at all.
Presumably because Vegeta is humbled very early on, whereas Korra is mildly humbled in the first 2 seasons a couple times, but gets over it quickly. But this odd inconsistency with the reaction, it's made it more apparent when the female lead is the most hated character in the show and revived by the fanbase, when the show surrounds the character with far worse, far more vile male characters. Case in point,
Skylar White, yo.
During the show's heyday, Skylar White was the most hated character in Breaking Bad, by a mile. But what did she really do that earned her that hate?
I fucked Ted.
Not a whole lot. She impeded Walter White. That's it. She provided an obstacle for the hero to proceed because she pushed back against Walter White's criminal actions. She served as a pseudo-antagonist to Walter for most of the series. And yes, she did eventually help Walter, which is a little hypocritical, very hypocritical given her early actions, but that doesn't change the fact that fans found her most annoying and grating early on. She was exhausting because she was an obstacle for the male hero to pursue his goals. And yeah, that can bother you. You're allowed to be annoyed by that. But that's storytelling.
I am the danger.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Historically, women have often been compared to other women in media, with the comparison being how often a character is done right or how often it's done wrong. And often the right character is the one who doesn't say anything mean about the other characters, other than the main antagonists, or when it's done for a comedic purpose or done briefly. And it's usually something superficial and small, as opposed to them actually looking down on someone or fundamentally questioning their functionality. Now, what's an example of this? Well, the great Captain Marvel and Alita Battle Angel fight of 2019. I know we were going in the past for this one, but bear with me here. Captain Marvel received a ton of hate early on in its release, with the phrase Girlboss being thrown around constantly in regards to who Captain Marvel was. When people saw the backlash to Captain Marvel, and the fact that all they had were posters and a trailer, and you're like, well, what is there to hate so far? It just seems like you're just upset a woman is in charge of a movie. Now, is Captain Marvel a great movie? No, by no means. But it is odd how the only thing we knew at the time was that Carol Danvers was the lead. She looked tough. She didn't dress in a very sexy, provocative way. and she was just punching an old lady in the face, apparently. But we didn't have anything else beyond that. And people were kind of like, we don't like this movie for other reasons. What it represents, we're not sexist. What else is coming out? Alita Battle Angel, that's coming out. This movie has a woman in it, and it's doing it the right way. We like this one. This Captain Marvel movie, no way. But Alita, that's the way to do a female lead. And they all petitioned to support Alita Battle Angel. None of them came to Alita Battle Angel because the film flopped, but I digress. And you want to know something really funny? Something I've said a few times on this channel, and I think means I have to hand in my Marvel fanboy card for this, but Alita Battle Angel is, in my opinion, the vastly better film of these two. It sucks that it was used as a scapegoat in this dumb online fight, but I think Alita has stronger cinematic voice, a stronger message, and the protagonist is more fleshed out. But why is Alita not a girl boss, but Carol Danvers is? Beyond the fact that girl boss is a meaningless buzzword, that means nothing outside of the context of online people shouting it as an excuse for criticism when they have nothing else to say. Carol Danvers, a lot gruffer than Alita. She doesn't smile. She's not inviting. She doesn't dress in a manner that makes a certain demographic of audiences, primarily male ones, interested. Alita does. As a result, the audiences that complained about the loudest were the ones that regard one as positive and one as negative. That they want to have our characters more inviting looking, more sweet looking, aesthetically. All superficial details. The whole Carol Danvers doesn't smile thing became a meme after a while. And, there's one scene with Carol Danvers, she is mean to a guy who's a jerk to her on a bike and steals his bike.
What, no smile?
But people went nuts over this deleted scene as though it was the biggest thing that mattered. Now, Captain Marvel is a mediocre film for a lot of reasons. For example, Carol Danvers' character isn't really explored all that much. The conflict feels very nebulous in the film. The Skrulls are the best part, yet the Skrulls barely get any development until the last act of the film. There's a lot of small things that add up. But Carol Danvers as a character is one of the big flaws because there's not a lot there to her. She starts off as a weapon for the Kree and exists as their perfect soldier, going to Earth to hunt more Skrulls. She acts no different from the rest of her crew, cold, distant, ready to kill with her eyes only on the mission. And that would be good if we saw a change come about her that really manifested as she continued on the mission and realized what she learned the whole time was a lie. She's been manipulated and lied to, her memories played with, but even when the revelations come forward about her past, she's still a soldier completing a mission. She hasn't grown, she hasn't changed or rejected that mindset. She just embraces it to a different end. She just becomes more powerful. That's the big change. Her power level, not her personality or mindset, though her motivations do shift. Meanwhile, Alita changes drastically throughout her story and is far more radicalized by witnessing systemic oppression and the hierarchy of power in her world. She's also far more vulnerable and is far more rebellious against oppression than Carol ever wants to be.
And I'm just an insignificant girl.
It just seems strange how ultimately different these two are, and how the internet interprets both based on superficial factors when their actions and behavior are far different. Hell, Alita is far more leftist than the conservative messaging of Captain Marvel, which is ironic considering a conservative reactionary movement championed Alita over Carol Danvers, because it was not about the ideas or actual themes, but rather the imagery and appearance of the story.
Pretty much.
Alita, on a purely visual level, was more appealing to a certain demographic, and they ignored what the film was actually about, because they didn't watch it. It's one of the reasons why many Tsundere characters are less controversial than your average Girlboss characters, even when the Tsundere character does something particularly egregious. What is a Tsundere? Well, a Tsundere, for those who don't know, it's an archetype from anime in Japan, where either a character starts off bitter and mean to a character, like usually the love interest, before gradually softening up, gradually coming in touch with her feelings and becoming more sweet, or a character who switches between off-putting aggression and sweet, almost timid vulnerability with a drop of a hat. Asuka is an example of the archetype, though I'd argue her character is a little more complex than the stock tropes ordinarily are. Often, the mean phases can consist of bullying or outright physical violence, usually played for slapstick comedy. While some people criticize Akane for Ranma 1/2 as an example of this, Akane is trading blows with another martial artist, Ranma. The two can take it. They're basically communicating through their fists half the time. Violence and all that, it's slapstick in the show. Physical punishment is not really as big of an issue. It's a pretty goofy show, obviously. What's less goofy is when a show like, say, Love Hina or Familiar of Zero has a tsundere character who inflicts violence upon the main character, and the joke is how painful it is for that character to experience. And that's a little rough. Because there's some intense moments of just outright abusive imagery, where the female lead abuses the male co-star. And look, I get that it's, like, comedic, but it feels almost like fetishistic cruelty at a certain point. It's deeply uncomfortable if you don't find it funny. Naru and Luis's actions are sometimes extremely violent, and they're vastly worse than anything Riri or Carol do, yet people just are fine with it. Tsundere are typically physically smaller and adorably drawn, and counterbalance their moments of roughness with sweetness, whereas other characters like Riri are just consistent. Now, while there's some characters like Asuka written as character studies, most are more in comedic stories, and it's played for laughs. You're meant to laugh at their roughness. It's not meant to be taken too seriously. Asuka's pain is. Riri's arrogance is. Even Korra's arrogance is taken seriously. It's not a joke, it's not a gag, it's the story. But there's, of course, another factor we have to address. Korra is a bisexual woman of color. Riri is a black woman. Asuka is biracial, but she's biracial in a way to make her visibly biracial to audiences. An audience member might just see her as a white girl. Now, am I saying that all the backlash to these characters is racist? Of course not. Carol Danvers is also white, so it can't be that simple. But I am saying online, it feels as though conflict is spurred on whenever a character who isn't white takes center stage in a work of media. And I get, listen, certain anime fans, they look at a character, they think, oh, it's Japanese. Obviously, it's a Japanese character. But not everyone thinks so. A lot of people still, to this very day, in some circles, will say, why the Japanese draw anime characters so white when they're obviously drawing it like Japanese characters? The animators don't think of it as white people. They don't center white people's feelings from America when designing Japanese characters. That's ridiculous. But it is important to note that Americans, primarily, who are maybe centering themselves in the equation of what another country makes, may see this very much in ethnocentric fashion and go, wow, all the Japanese characters look white to me. I mean, they have blonde hair, they have all these crazy hair colors and eye colors. That doesn't look Japanese. Some shows do draw Japanese characters very distinctly. Yuri on Ice, for example, has a very good way of distinguishing the ethnicities of the various characters throughout. But Asuka is drawn very similarly to how Shinji's drawn. And again, a lot of people may not even realize Asuka is biracial, despite the fact her name is Asuka Langley Soryu, a mix of Japanese and German names, and how it's a key part of her character that she comes from Germany. However, no one is in doubt that Korra isn't white, other than maybe M. Night Shyamalan, who cast white people in the Water Tribe in his Avatar adaptation, even though, they're inspired by the Inuit people. So, Korra is more visibly darker than Aang. And that's impossible to deny. She's a woman of color. And also bisexual. There's a whole discussion of that. In fairness, the backlash to Korra was long before her sexuality was revealed in Nicole's show. She was stuck in a love triangle before that, so that doesn't really factor in all that much. The backlash to these characters always seems more intense if the person is a visible minority. And if the work has something easy for people to focus on, the criticism gets all the more extreme. But people get upset they can't say a woman of color is on screen, so they find new ways to justify their anger. It's not that, they don't want to see a woman in the lead of a story. It's that she's arrogant. She just needs to know her place. She needs to stop talking so much. She needs to stop pushing herself like she's so great. Aang did so much more great stuff than her. Why is she able to talk so confidently and so arrogantly about her powers? Why is she able to talk people down like this? Why is she so right all the time? Why does she keep doing the right thing somehow, despite the fact that nothing she's saying makes any sense? I don't see how it adds up. This is really frustrating.
Are you okay? I'm just frustrated.
That's how it starts. And from there, what you would normally see is just simply a character behaving in a way that is reflective of their personality. It gets bigger and bigger, and it snowballs. And you're focusing on the flaws more than the positives because your mind is looking for flaws. And again, I'm not saying that all criticism against a black, arrogant character is racist. Far from it. I'm saying, though, if you are racist, hyperfixate on these issues and then tell others that's the problem. And that spreads the contagion of the idea. You see, again, it's strange how the complaints against Riri can also apply to Tony Stark. I mean, after all, Tony Stark creates Ultron and unintentionally destroys thousands upon thousands of people, and he's fine. But Riri lets one guy who is trying to kill her die. And all of a sudden, she's a sociopath. Scott Lang, burglar, single-handedly sets off these huge heists on his own. But he's loved, he's a sweet guy. Riri, though, works a couple of times in heists and quits the moment things get violent, and all of a sudden she's a hardened criminal, a sociopath, a black stereotype even, for doing less than what Scott Lang did, and Scott Lang is celebrated.
Huh? Who would have thought? Not me.
Do you see the double standard yet? But unlike Tony and Scott, Riri does suffer immediate consequences for her actions, one of which has implications that might result in her suffering immensely in the future. Yet that counterbalance does not change the internet's reactions to her as a figure, consistently. Now, the best indication of this backlash is looking at a character who is doing the exact same thing, but is played by someone of color, a different race, different ethnicity. Same character, same actions, one white, one not white. But I can't think of any examples like that, can I?
Late, I'm so late.
So my adventure with Superman, I don't think it's any secret that Lois Lane, across multiple iterations, pulls insane stunts to get Superman to reveal his identity. In Superman 2, Lois either throws herself off into Niagara Falls,
Oh my god.
or shoots Clark Kent to prove her point, that Clark is Superman.
Lois, now don't be crazy now. What?
However, when My Adventure with Superman came out, and Lois, early on in the series, figures out Clark is Superman,
We'll do this the hard way.
she does the same thing. She throws herself off a building to get Superman to expose himself. But she's then criticized as crazy. The interesting thing is, in this version, Lois Lane is part Korean. The episode sparked a ton of controversy for both how Lois got Superman to expose himself and how upset she was that Superman lied to her about his identity. And this sets up an arc with Lois where she feels very insecure when people lie to her, especially men in her life. But, it's also a story beat, It's a twofold problem. One, this Lois Lane isn't white. Two, this Lois Lane was pissed in a way that can't be funny or can't be charming. And it was one of those problems where both sides of the argument, they were justified in what they did. And they were justified in being upset. And the argument was resolved partway through the next episode in a way that made it clear that this was always intended to be a momentary argument in an otherwise healthy relationship by the writers. But the backlash was absurd and fast to this instance. With a whole week, people were angry that Lois Lane was ruined, and they were angry that she was given a boyish haircut and not a feminine appearance as well, because that mattered, apparently, in this discussion. Lois Lane is far more tomboyish and less feminine in My Adventure with Superman. Now, the more feminine a character is, it seems, the more audiences are willing to forgive backlashes. And the great thing about social engineering is that if a few people are loud and they proclaim these faults based on their own biases, but they don't mention their biases, someone else might hear them and go, that's compelling stuff. I agree with that. Yeah, that thing is bad. And if it's loud enough and consistent enough, it may make people align with it without fully thinking through what is actually going on here. And let's be perfectly clear. Again, a lot of female leads have done far, far, far less worse stuff than their male counterparts. A lot of people worship Eren Yeager and Light Yagami, perhaps because of all the war crimes. Tony Stark did vastly worse stuff than Riri, yet no one cares. And if any woman was half as arrogant as Vegeta is in Dragon Ball Z, can you imagine the backlash? Yet we're socially engineered to hate some characters, but not others, through online discourse from very loud voices that sound all-consuming. And when you add bots to that equation that just spread the words throughout everything, it becomes harder to deal with. There's a famous experiment, the Asch Conformity experiments. You put a guy in a room full of actors, and you tell the one guy here that everyone is here to study the ability to measure based on sight or something like that. You bring up a bunch of lines on screen, you project them onto the wall, each line is a different length. Test taker asks, hey, which line is the longest? Identify it for me. And everyone, one by one, before the actual human in the room speaks, They all point to a line in the middle, a middle-length line. That's the longest one. And the first guy's like, oh, it's easy. Obviously, it's line A that's the longest, but everyone keeps saying B, 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 when it's obvious B is shorter than A. Typically speaking, the human in the room will eventually change his answer to B to align with the crowd, either because they second-guessed, they doubted their own judgment, or they were afraid to give the wrong answer. That, hey, maybe it's better to just go with the crowd rather than say what I have to say, because I'll stand out, I'll be embarrassed.
What? I like White Castle.
I think the internet is just one of those experiments in a larger scale. If everyone says loud enough this is bad, we believe it. And online, they are people with biases they don't reveal. And if everyone points and says this is bad, eventually you'll join in, even if you're not thinking through the whole situation enough, because they said it loud enough, they said it convincingly enough, and enough people echoed what they said to convince you that they're right. If we take this at its most loosest general term, people are just more willing to get angry when a character who doesn't fit their perfect mold of what they want exists, especially if they're off-putting in some way. But then again, what do they really want? Most of the arrogant characters we've talked about who get people angry, they do get punished at some point. Their arrogance is a flaw that's addressed in the narrative, and their arc is overcoming that, an internal conflict, and it needs to be beaten. The Tsundere characters we discussed often don't get humbled, at least not the same way. Riri faces more backlash for her actions than Louise from Familiar of Zero, yet Riri faces consequences for her actions in the story, at least lasting punishment, whereas Louise just beats the main character with a bullwhip or something. We need to acknowledge before hating a character, are we angry because this character actually upset us, or is our anger manufactured by the online machine in some way? Does someone stand to benefit from our anger towards a character? And if so, why? Criticize anyone you want, any character you want, for whatever reason you want. But be honest with yourself, why this bothers you. And if it's consistent with what you'd feel if the character were a man, or white, or any number of things.
Yeah, fuck that.
You shot my leg!
Because the alternative is you're being played by someone who stands to benefit from your irrational anger.